Welcome to Twin Talk Politics. Hello, welcome back to another episode of Twin Talk Politics. And on this Tuesday morning, we are so lucky to be joined by MP Garrison, who's a member of parliament for Esquimalt, Saanich, Sooke. We have so many things to talk to him about today. But first, how are you today, MP Garrison?
Well, it's a great day. Nice and sunny. A bit too hot for some people, but a bit too dry, which means we've got high fire risk in the neighborhood. But other than that, I'm doing good.
Yeah, great. That sounds great. So let's just jump straight into the interview. So the first question we have for you today is going to be pretty basic. And that is, could you please tell us a little bit more about who you are, so potentially your hobbies outside of politics, and how you got engaged and involved in politics in the first place?
It's hard to remember how I first got involved in politics because it goes all the way back to when I was in high school. I grew up in a family where my grandparents were quite influential, and they encouraged everybody to give back. And they set a good example by being constant volunteers in the community. And they asked all of us as their grandkids what it was we were going to do, and if we didn't have ideas, they would help us. And so all of my cousins, there were 15 of us,
Wow.
all of us ended up being involved in some kind of community activities as a teenager because of my grandparents insisting that this was something we all needed to do. So that really has continued. And again, all my cousins are still, all their lives have been involved in the community. Not necessarily politics.
Yeah.
I'm actually the only one who's directly involved in politics, but in trying to do things to make their community better. So that was a really big influence on me and set the course. So I've always been involved in things. When I was in university, I met some refugees. And I guess I had a natural affinity because I came to Canada from the United States before I would have been labeled a refugee. But when I came 50 years ago, it was illegal to be gay in the US. And so I crossed the border into Canada where it wasn't illegal. And I was here illegally to start with. And then I worked with some members of the community here who encouraged me to go back, help me come through the immigration process legally.
Wow.
And so I had a natural affinity then when I met other refugees. And so from the time I was in university until I became an MP, I've always been involved in work with refugees. And as a member of parliament, it's been one of the things I've been proud to continue doing as an MP. So I also did international human rights work.
Yeah.
And that kind of flowed from my work with refugees. I know I got a letter one day asking if I knew who would be a good person to go and work on the UN referendum on independence in East Timor. And I thought and thought and thought. And then my husband said to me, "No, you dummy, they want you to volunteer." And so I did volunteer. I went and worked in East Timor as a co-coordinator of the independence referendum. And then after that, I went back to Southeast Asia the next year to work on a peace building project between Christians and Muslims.
Wow. That's really interesting.
I also did some work in the Philippines in areas of conflict. And so most of my international human rights work was done in Asia. And when I came back, I guess maybe I'll just go ahead and tell the story because it kind of flows. When I came back to Canada, I got a message saying, would I have lunch with Jack Layton, the leader of the NDP, who wanted to talk about international human rights work. And I fell for that. And I went to lunch with him. And at the end of the lunch, he said, "I guess you think there should be gay people in parliament, and we don't have too many." And I said, "Well, of course I do." And he said, "Well, how do you think they get there if people like you won't run?" And it was a very effective recruiting tool.
Yeah.
He said, "I know we've asked you and you said no." And at that time, I was teaching criminal justice. That was my career for 20 years. My husband and I were quite happy. And it wasn't something that was on my radar. And so if I hadn't been recruited, I wouldn't have ended up working in politics directly.
Wow, that's really inspiring. That's such a cool story. So our second question is just really going to get more into the meat of the interview, and it's actually split into two parts. So firstly, we just wanted to get your opinion on what you think is the most important issue or issues in Canada concerning youth. And then secondly, what are some of the most pressing concerns surrounding youth within your own constituency?
Well, I've found that youth concerns pretty much mirror those of society in general.
Mhm.
I really think that the concern we have now about cost of living, about how people are going to establish and support families, and all those kinds of things, those are concerns of youth as much as they are society as a whole. And in particular, in my community, it's a very expensive community where rents and purchasing houses are just
Yeah.
beyond most people's means. That's become a really critical issue, is where we expect people to be able to live, and some initiatives to work on that. I think the second thing, and again locally, it's shared between youth and other people in my riding, is the climate crisis.
Yeah. Sure.
And when we talk about what's going on in the climate crisis, people act like it's somewhere else sometimes. And right now in my riding, we have a wildfire burning out of control at the Sooke potholes. We've had to close the main cycle route. They've had to close the campgrounds, and the fire's still today still not under control. And that's a direct result of human activity. I say that quite directly, since some people deny that,
Yeah.
and it's only going to get worse. And so I find that youth, of course, will have to live with the consequences longer than some of the rest of us. But it's a common concern, is how we can turn this around and stop making this planet so uninhabitable for humans and for all of the species.
Yeah, we
Sure.
completely agree with that. We think the climate crisis is probably the most important issue in the world, not only in Canada. So given that, what strategies have you advocated for or hope to advocate for that really reduces the issue that we just talked about? We know you're a huge proponent in pushing for helping the climate change, whether it be your motion 460, or as we're going to talk a little bit more about your motion 53.
Well, I'd say two things. Since we said two issues, let me just say first on housing that I've been a strong advocate that we have to return to building nonprofit, non-market housing in this country,
Mhm.
which we did 30 years ago, and we stopped. And when we wonder why people can't find a place to live, we no longer build housing co-ops. We no longer
Wow,
build
yeah.
nonprofit housing. And the federal government had played a big role in that before, and we have to go back to that. We can't solve the housing crisis through market mechanisms alone. There are
Mhm.
things we can do with the market, but there really has to be a very strong nonprofit housing
Yeah.
sector. And one of the things in my writing is we have some cooperatives that are 30 years old. And I worked closely with a couple of them on rebuilding, rehabilitating, and expanding those existing co-ops. And most of them were built in an era where there was very low density. They're sort of low density townhouse developments with big parking lots. And what we've been working on is actually building some 6-story units on those existing co-ops on the parking lot, of 1-bedroom units, and moving the people who lived there for a long time, most of them now become seniors, from the 3-bedroom units with stairs to the new 1-bedroom units, and then bringing new families into the co-op.
Wow.
And it's an interesting little local strategy that, again, not my idea, but 2 of the local co-ops pioneered this. And one of the big obstacles is that because they don't own their land, no one will lend them the money to build the new
Oh,
6-story building.
yeah.
And so these 2 co-ops got Van City, the credit union, as a demonstration project to lend them the money. And what I've been after is for CMHC, as the federal housing agency, to establish a program to lend money to densify existing co-ops, and to therefore create more space. And also, rather than tearing them down, it expands the community,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it keeps the people who've been living there together, and it helps in the multi-generational parts of the co-op. So that's one of the things locally that I'm proud of.
Yeah,
It's an
that's really
initiative
cool.
that started in my riding, and I have tried to support that. In terms of climate change, there's reactive things, and I spent a very long time working on trying to get better protection for southern resident killer whales because we're about to lose them, and we've made a lot of progress. There's still more to do, but we made a lot of progress, and I did that by bringing together local environmentalists, the whale watching industry, and government to all sit at the same table and try to find common solutions. And as a result of a lot of that work, we agreed on backing up the whale watching boats so they're not infringing so much on the southern residents. And we agreed on some areas which we included fishermen in those consultations. And so we included some suggestions for areas for more protected areas, which have now been adopted.
Wow, yeah.
By the federal government. So there's a need for that kind of protective, reactive work.
Yeah.
But there's also a need to change our direction altogether. And I think you two are quite well aware. I've been pushing that we need actually a federal crown corporation to build renewable energy projects.
Yeah.
They're profitable. And we just need somebody to demonstrate how profitable they are. And I think the public sector could do that. And they also need to start doing that in communities where the fossil fuel industry is the main employer. For sure. Because we have to demonstrate to those families who depend on the fossil fuel industry that we're not going to leave them behind, that we're not going to make them pay for challenging the climate crisis with their mortgages and their jobs. So if we had a crown corporation that was setting up those renewable energy jobs in those communities, it would help bring more support for combating climate change instead of making those who work in the fossil industry afraid of the transition. And so that was my reasoning behind my proposal to create Renewable Canada as a crown corporation. And we're making some progress on that with the current agreement between the NDP and the Liberals in Parliament.
For sure. That was really, really cool. And specifically, I found the part where like no one is left behind, no matter which side you support, everyone is getting benefited. I really, really am inspired by like that win-win approach. And just I want to talk a little bit more and picking up on what we just talked about, specifically on your motion 53. And for those of you who don't know, it was just the motion that MP Garrison was just explaining, specifically pushing for more renewable energy. And the part I found really cool was we do this by actually accelerating job creation through transitioning towards green energy projects, whether it be like geothermal, solar, wind, or tidal areas. Specifically in Canada, where like transitional jobs and existing energy workers are most needed. And the thing I found really fascinating about this entire motion is that a bunch of this is being funded with the savings of ending fossil fuel subsidies. So we just want to kind of ask you to explain a little bit more about how this motion will not only help Canada achieve a bunch of its climate goals, but also simultaneously create so many new jobs for a younger generation like us.
Well, as New Democrats, we're often challenged with how you're going to pay for it.
Yeah.
And so what I tried to include was the way to pay for it, which is to stop subsidizing fossil fuel industry and to take that money and invest it in renewable energy. One of the things I did is I actually hired an expert to work in my office to do a comparison of the skills needed in renewable energy and the skills that exist in the fossil fuel industry. And I was pretty certain what they were going to find. And they found there's a really high transference of those skills. So instead of just saying to people who work in the fossil fuel industry, you got to give up your job.
Wow. Yeah.
We need to be saying to them, your skills are valuable in renewable energy.
That's crazy. Yeah.
And so that was my initiative for this, was to try and reach out to those people and say, you got skills and we got renewable energy that projects need to be built. Let's marry those two up together.
Wow.
But the private sector is not going to do that, because they're heavily invested in the profits they're making in fossil fuels. So that's why we need Crown Corporation federally to step up and get those projects going.
Sure. Wow, that sounds really cool. I think that's a really good explanation to see like the skills from the fossil fuel industry are transferable into this new plan. And just really hoping that plan goes through. So we also know, aside from all the amazing work that you do with the climate, you currently serve as the NDP's critic for 2S LGBTQI+ rights. And we know that upholding these rights is a very integral part of your identity, as you stated in some questions before. And being a trailblazing representative for this vibrant community on such a high level, such as the federal level. We were just wondering if you could please discuss some specific initiatives or work you are involved in as this role to support and advance these very, very important rights.
Well, when I was first elected to Parliament, Jack Layton made me our party spokesperson on what I call queer rights for short. And there'd never been a party which had an official spokesperson on queer rights before in Parliament. And so I was quite pleased to have the support of the leader and the support of my party on some initiatives. And one of the first things that I tackled was the biggest gap that existed in our human rights legislation, which was that transgender and non-binary people were not listed as protected. And so I had a private member's bill. This again was the Harper era and a conservative majority government. And we worked and got that private member's bill passed, even in a conservative majority parliament. And I did that by working with members of the community. And so one of the things we did, and I've told this story a couple of places, is we were trying to figure out what conservatives to approach. And we made a list of other progressive issues and looked to see a list. I guess we made a list of 21, I think it was, conservative MPs who on other issues like pro-choice or other things were not traditional conservatives. And so we approached the MPs on that list by having members of the transgender and non-binary community in their ridings make appointments to go and see their MP.
That's really cool.
And tell them their story. And so how did it work that we got so many conservatives? We needed 18 of them and we got them. It worked because brave people locally went and told their stories to their MP in the riding. So while I got to have my name on the bill, it only succeeded because of the grassroots organizing and the willingness of trans and non-binary people to tell their own stories. And I had a conservative MP said, I think you're sending people to see me. And I said, yes, I am. They're called your constituents and they're going to tell you their stories. And then I'm going to ask you how you're going to vote on my bill. And so that's the way that moved forward. That's probably the biggest one we got done. The Senate sat on it and killed it. So we had to start over in 2016. And I worked with the Liberals and it did pass as a government bill. I also worked on ending the blood ban. Again, a very strong grassroots initiative that was done with a lot of leadership from the trade union movement called All Blood is Equal. This crazy idea left over from the 80s that somehow gay blood was different than other people's blood. And so people like me were banned from donating blood. And what we were able to demonstrate was that what you need is behavior-based analysis of those who are donating, that what's risky is high-risk behavior. It's not risky being gay, it's risky engaging in high-risk behavior. And so that took a decade, but we finally got that ban lifted. And one of the things we kept saying is we have a shortage of donors. I got an easy way for you to add 5% to your donors. Stop excluding gay men. Right? And so that worked. So that was another initiative that I worked on that I was quite proud to see go forward. And the last one I'll mention is just refugees. And when I initially got elected, there was a crisis in Chechnya where the government was calling on families to actually murder their gay family members. And so I went to the Minister of Foreign Affairs at the time and said, we're in touch with local organizations. We need to get people out of Chechnya as refugees based on their sexual orientation. And Canadian law allows that. But in practice, it hasn't been very easy to do that. So the conservative minister at the time, and it's now long enough since that happened, said, I'll work with you as long as you don't tell anybody. And his concern was that we not generate a large backlash. And I said, I don't really care. These people are in imminent danger and we need to get them out. So we worked together on 55 cases where we got people from Chechnya to Toronto. And it's only this year that I've actually spoken publicly about that. But what it taught me was we needed changes in our immigration system to make them more queer friendly. And ministers would say to me, well, we don't discriminate and we allow asylum claims based on sexual orientation. I said, that's absolutely right, except that the way to access the system is to go through local staff and Canadian embassies or to go through refugee camps, both of which are extremely queer hostile.
Oh,
And,
yeah.
and so no one's going to go into an office and say, I'd like to go to Canada because I'm queer, because the risk is that they will be beaten, or as in the case in refugee camps in Africa, often murdered, if that became known. And so, again, it took almost a decade, but we now have Rainbow Refugee based in Toronto, which works with local on-the-ground organizations that can accept applications. So people don't have to go to refugee camps, and they don't have to go through the local staff in Canadian embassies. And a special allocation in the immigration system for queer refugees. And so, again, that took us almost a decade to get something going. It still has pilot status, and it needs to become permanent. But we've now made it possible for people to access the system.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. I'd like to say that's like really, really motivational to like see all the other initiatives that you've really been fighting hard for. Like in the first start, to really see the power of storytelling, to see like the power of the communities overall, and just the power of love. That was really, really motivational, and really thank you for all the initiatives and all the help you've done towards Canada.
Can I just say, last night I went to a party
Yeah.
for a family who are from Syria, who have 2 adult queer children.
Yeah.
And they had become refugees in Lebanon because they didn't want their kids killed. So the whole family moved to Lebanon, and they applied for status in Canada, and they were at risk of being deported back to Syria. So we intervened with the minister's office, and within 9 months we got them. And so I went to the celebration party for their arrival last night. And they're such a strong and supportive family of their 2 queer kids.
Yeah.
And it's really great to see them set up here in Canada. And so we can talk about the policy parts, but when you actually go and meet the family, it's really moving.
Yeah. Cool. And I think that's one of the things that's really inspired me and Jerry, I'm sure all Canadians all over Canada, is all the phenomenal work you've done towards this amazing community by not just being a representative, but also pushing out so much great policies, whether it be leading initiatives to find a safe path, as you said, for queer and trans refugees, to be a key member in the bill C16, or your own private member's bill, as we just talked about, in Bill C279. As MP Garrison were just saying. For all the viewers at home who are unfamiliar with this policy, it essentially amends the Canada Human Rights Act and the Criminal Code to include gender identity as a prohibited grounds for discrimination, and allows it to be considered in sentencing for crimes that includes and motivated by hate. So our question for you just briefly is, we were wondering if you could please explain the importance of this bill, and how do you envision the future of queer rights for youth in Canada?
So being treated equally is an important Canadian value. I think Canadians generally think everyone should be treated equally.
Yeah,
and so when we had laws that actually excluded people based on gender identity, and I will also say gender expression, because they're both there, it becomes problematic. And so there's the practical matters of people can lay complaints for discrimination, or that the police can use the aggravating circumstances in hate crimes. But it's more creating a sense of belonging as Canadian by having everybody included in the protections that are offered. So I see those 2 things happening at the same time. Most people from my community are never going to file a human rights complaint, and thankfully, most are not going to be subject to a hate crime. But the fact that you know that you have the same rights as other Canadians is an important part of what it means to be Canadian.
Definitely. For sure. Yeah, I think that's really powerful. Great. So the next part of our interview will be much more directed and focused towards the youth. So we know that there has been, sadly, a decline in youth engagement in Canada as of right now. So our question towards you is, how do you think, in your opinion, can the youth become more politically engaged in the political sphere and contribute to tackling some of the aforementioned issues that we just talked about that Canada currently faces?
Well, I told you the story at the beginning about my grandparents, and I kind of repeat what they did with me. And when youth ask me what to do, I say, well, where are you volunteering?
Yeah.
Where are you getting involved? Pick something you care about and go and volunteer. That's gets people started
Yeah.
on working on some kind of concrete project to make their community better.
Mhm.
So I'm really kind of paying forward what my grandparents did with me
Yeah.
in saying, what is that? And if people don't have ideas, I can make suggestions for them, just like my grandparents did. Here's things you can actually do. Here's people who are looking for volunteers. Here's people who need some help. And so I think it's important to convey that message. One of my big concerns, as I'm not running again and I'm leaving politics, is this idea that Canada is broken and that politics in Canada is broken. That's only true if people choose to make it broken.
Yeah.
That's a choice people are making. That's not a fact. In fact, the parliament we're in right now is the most productive parliament probably in at least 60 years.
Wow.
And we've worked across party lines, except for one party, which doesn't participate, to get things done. And there's one party who's against everything and wants everything to fail. And that's the party that says Canada's broken. Well, it's not broken.
Yeah.
And working together, we can do great things. And I think we have to reassure you that that's still possible, and not rage farm and not play to the negativity. No, we haven't accomplished everything I'd like to accomplish in this parliament, but we've done a lot.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that mentality shift was really cool. Like, nothing is truly broken until you just continuously think to yourself that it is broken. That was a really cool perspective and very refreshing one to say. And the next question we have for you is a little bit more regarding the voting age of Canada. Do you potentially think that if we lower the federal voting age to maybe 16, as proposed by Bill C-210, it will gain the attention of more youth to vote and then therefore spur more youth engagement within politics?
So I've been a supporter of lowering the voting age for 20 years.
Yeah.
And I'm still a very firm supporter. I guess one reason is the practical reason that while kids are still in school, they get involved in voting, there's a chance to help them learn what it means, to learn what the responsibilities are, to learn how it works. But the other part of it is I've had people say to me, well, how do you know that people who are 16 are responsible enough to vote? And my answer to that always is, and we're testing the other people, are we?
Yeah.
We're testing everybody else to see if they're responsible enough to vote. I don't think we do that.
Yeah.
And I believe that everyone who is 16 and wants to vote should vote.
Yeah.
And it's not my place to judge how they vote or their qualifications to vote, because we don't do that with anyone else. So it's just a very ageist perspective. And if we did it that way, there's a lot of other people we'd probably end up disqualified.
Yeah, that's really, really cool. Yeah, I definitely, again, just Jason and I wholeheartedly believe that like definitely the voting age should be lowered. Everything you said is something we strongly, truly believe in. And moving on to another part of the interview and something more personal to your life that we found so interesting. I think we talked a little about this at the beginning of our interview, but we know before you became an MP, you worked extensively to uphold human rights, whether it be working as a policy researcher in Afghanistan or being a critical part of a peace building project in Indonesia and so many other cool initiatives. And if it was possible, and I know it may be hard to choose out of everything you've done, but what would you say is your coolest and most memorable experience while advocating for human rights all around the world?
Well, being the co-chair of the Human Rights Observer Mission for the independence referendums in East Timor was very intense. Many people lost their lives. More than 1,500 people were killed during the voting for independence. But I had been involved with Timorese solidarity work for probably 20 years before that. And people kept saying, it's hopeless. Why would you work on this? This is never going to happen. And so for me, somebody who'd been supportive of the right of the Timorese to decide their own future, it was very fulfilling and rewarding to be part of the efforts to make sure that they could express those opinions and achieve independence. So difficult, dangerous, lots of people who lost their lives as a result of that. But East Timor became an independent country and is following its own path now. So that was very, very rewarding. But I'd have to say also my time in Afghanistan, when I went to work for, I usually don't say who because I'm a politician. And so when I name the International Human Rights Organization, it sometimes feels like it compromises them. But I was working for a major international human rights organization. And at the end of the interview, I was living with my husband in Indonesia. And at the end of the interview, they said, well, we think we're going to offer you this job. And I said, well, you do realize I'm an out gay man. And the person who was conducting the interview said, yeah, in Afghanistan, it's not the first thing I would tell people.
Yeah.
But after I'd been there a few months, I had a driver and a translator. I was working very closely with them. And we were doing research into policing in Afghanistan from a human rights-based perspective. We were waiting to see a regional police chief who was avoiding us. And we were back for the second day of waiting in his office for him to show up. And so I was talking with my driver and my interpreter, and they said, we're really disappointed you don't trust us. And I said, but I trust you with my life. I depend on you completely to do this work and to keep you safe. And they said, yes, but you don't talk about your family. And I said, okay, I'm going to prove how much I trust you. I'm married to a man. And they both laughed. And then they went, oh, you're serious?
Yeah.
And they said, so that's who you call every night? Because we know you make a phone call every night. And I said, yes. Yeah, I'm calling my husband. And the driver put his arm around me and he said, don't worry. Even if they torture me, I won't tell them.
Wow.
Which was very sweet.
Yeah.
But heartbreaking when you think about people in Afghanistan who were also queer. And the extreme danger and extreme hostility toward queer people in many other societies. So that affected me a lot and kind of redoubled my commitment to trying to do something for queer refugees, which I've been able to do as an MP.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, that was really, really inspiring. And I'm just lost for words right now hearing that, very beautiful story, but as you said, very sad at the same time, that even though we are so lucky and so privileged, there's so many other individuals out there who don't share the same privilege as we do. And then for our last question, just to lighten the mood a little bit, we know your constituency is incredibly beautiful, and with summer in full swing, we know many families, including our own, are planning to visit very, very soon. And we are just wondering if you could give us some pointers on what are some must-see places for those planning a trip to your constituency?
Well, I mentioned earlier the Sooke potholes, which are closed because of the wildfire, but it is one of the high points. And if the fire gets under control, very good swimming spot, and also in Sooke, Whiffin Spit, which is a spit that separates the harbor from the open sea. It's a great place to go for walks and hikes. But I think, yes, it's a very beautiful riding. But I think for me, there's a lot of beauty in the community here. So quite often tourists don't get to see that. They get to see the natural beauty, they get to see the sights, but they don't get to see the strength of community, the strength of First Nations in my riding. And that's somewhat disappointing. So if you happen to be here during the time of any of the community festivals that go on, take part in those. Take part in those because you'll meet a very exciting community.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for the pointers. We'll definitely check out the festivals if there's any going on, and we'll definitely check out the spots to see the natural beauty as well. All right, that concludes our interview today. Again, I want to thank MP Garrison for being so vulnerable and sharing these very, very personal stories with us today. Again, and his phenomenal team for setting up this amazing opportunity and taking the time out of his very, very, very busy schedule to be able to meet with us today. We truly appreciate it. We had a blast. We learned so much. So thank you guys once again.
Can I just say that I think you two are playing an important role in motivating youth by doing this kind of podcast. So I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about these things with you today.
Yeah, no worries. It was our pleasure. It was our pleasure. Yeah, I learned so much. Thank you so much. And for all the listeners at home, if you guys wish to see more interviews like this, be sure to tune in to future episodes. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you guys next time.